This year, even the Chinese Communist Party is taking notice of April Fool's Day, but it seems the apparent jokes went too far. The Biden administration's first trade report labels Beijing as the world's leading offender of creating overcapacity in a number of sectors. It also reiterates China's responsibilities under the Phase 1 U.S. China trade agreement. Chinese state-run media outlets quote a French reporter who denies that genocide is happening in China's Xinjiang region. But French media say this reporter doesn't actually exist. A number of international fashion brands are refusing to use cotton from Xinjiang due to concerns over forced labor. But the abusive labor practice isn't just limited to that region. A new book brings the situation to light. And 2 Chinese-made vaccines have met the World Health Organization standard, but some countries who've distributed those doses are facing a surge of new infections. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. This year, even the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is taking notice of April Fool's Day. April 1st is usually filled with outlandish claims and jokes, especially on social media. But netizens seem particularly suspicious about one Weibo post shared by Xinhua News Agency, the Communist Party's media mouthpiece. They say it could be a joke, but now it seems some have taken it too far. The Xinhua Post reads, "Today is the so-called April Fool's Day in the West. April Fool's Day does not conform to our Chinese cultural traditions and the core values of socialism. We hope you will not believe in rumors, create rumors, or spread rumors." The comment features a smiling face emoji, leading some users to believe the post is actually an April Fool's joke. But as more netizens commented, the digital thread took a turn. Out of 2,600 comments, all but 12 have since been removed. They were taken down by Beijing's web censors. Some of the deleted posts appear to poke fun at other state-run media outlets. One of them said the CCTV channel commemorates April Fool's Day every day at 7 p.m. There's really no need to honor it separately. The netizen is referring to the pro-Beijing broadcaster's 7 o'clock evening news. Another netizen wrote, "It is stupid to designate a day to deceive people and say that today is Fool's Day. This doesn't conform to China's socialist values. If you want to cheat, you have to cheat every day like the Communist Party-run media. You have to cheat any time in any situation. This is our correct value." Still another posted a short but powerful comment. "Socialism is April Fool's Day every day, okay?" The Biden administration's first trade report is calling out China for its trade practices. It labeled Beijing as the world's leading offender of creating overcapacity in several sectors. The annual National Trade Estimate Report examines 65 of the top U.S. trading partners in detail. They account for almost all of America's goods trade and nearly 90% of services trade. The Wednesday report made clear that U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai will take up a hardline approach to address China's harmful trade practices. One of them is China's industrial plan, known as Made in China 2025. The goal is to replace foreign products and services with Chinese products and services in its domestic market and around the world. But a U.S. foreign policy think tank called the Council on Foreign Relations has raised concerns. It questions how China plans to achieve that goal, citing the possibility of forcing foreign companies to hand over their technology to Chinese companies. The think tank says Beijing's policy will lean on intellectual property theft and cyber espionage. The report says that whether China succeeds or fails in this plan, just by trying, it will likely cause harm. The plan will create severe access capacity in several different markets. That's when supply is much higher than demand. Overcapacity leads to price drops and could lead to job loss and even potential bankruptcy for some companies. The trade estimate report also reiterated China's responsibilities under last year's trade agreement with the U.S. The Phase 1 agreement requires China to purchase an additional $200 billion worth of U.S. goods and services during 2020 and 2021, compared to 2017 levels. So far, China has only lived up to a third of that requirement. It is unknown if the U.S. will retaliate if China doesn't honor the agreement. Boeing is urging the United States to keep human rights separate from trade relations with Beijing. Boeing CEO says it can't afford to be locked out of China. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is urging the U.S. to separate its human rights disputes with China with its trade relations. He says Boeing should be left out of bilateral disputes and warned it could be locked out of the China market. He told the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Aviation Summit Wednesday, "I think politically China is more difficult, but we still have to trade with our biggest partner in the world, China." Boeing and its European rival Airbus each sell about a quarter of their jetliners to China, which is now the world's largest domestic travel market. China has expressed concerns about Boeing's 737 MAX, which was grounded for nearly 2 years after 2 fatal crashes. It was approved to fly again in November, but China has said it will take a step-by-step approach to approving the jet. Western sources say concerns are growing that Beijing could be leveraging the approval process in a diplomatic standoff with Washington. Calhoun said Boeing cannot afford to be locked out of the Chinese market. He said its competitor Airbus will jump right in. And this week, the U.S. Trade Representative's office highlighted international trade barriers it faced worldwide. It highlighted China as the leading offender that causes harm to American companies and farmers. Beijing faces tension with the West over its treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang, where more than 1 million people are held in internment camps. China rejects the allegation and has warned foreign companies not to step into politics. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Amid a storm of Chinese boycotts, H&M has released a statement vowing to win back China's trust. But it doesn't seem to have worked. The flurry of Chinese backlash and boycotts stemmed from the Swedish fashion brand's decision not to use cotton from Xinjiang. That's over forced labor concerns there. H&M's new statement says the brand is dedicated to regaining the trust and confidence of customers, colleagues, and business partners in China. But the company did not apologize for previous comments it made regarding Xinjiang. Neither did it say that it would resume sourcing Xinjiang cotton. The company's original statement about not using the material can still be found on its website. The statement indirectly says it respects China's laws, but also international laws, indicating rules against forced labor. Chinese state media has labeled the company insincere, while Chinese netizens say they will continue to boycott the brand. The Chinese regime is suspected to have made up a fake French reporter for its state media. Chinese Communist Party mouthpiece CGTN recently published an article by a person named Lorraine Beaumont. She claims to be the channel's France-based freelance reporter. She writes about China's Xinjiang region. Beaumont's reports deny that genocide and human rights abuses are happening in Xinjiang. But French newspaper Le Monde said on Wednesday that according to the registration information from a French government commission for journalists, this reporter doesn't exist. A senior researcher from U.S.-based think tank NBR Think Tank and another researcher from France-based Strategic Research Foundation both claim that Beaumont doesn't exist. Beaumont writes that she's French and lived in China for 7 years. She also says she has lived in Xinjiang's capital and visited the region twice. She says, quote, "I don't think the Xinjiang that other people describe to me is the one I know." In her reports, Beaumont also claims she used to work in Paris as a journalist. Another CCP mouthpiece, China Radio International, published a commentary from Beaumont on Wednesday. She writes that French lawmakers' plan to visit Taiwan is ridiculous. She encourages them to cancel exchanges with Taiwan. CGTN just got its permit to broadcast in the French language in France. A researcher at French-based Strategic Research Foundation says it is hard to imagine that the Chinese regime is coming up with fake reporters, and he wishes that Beaumont will interview him. Many international fashion brands have refused to use cotton from China's Xinjiang region. They cited concerns over forced labor. But forced labor in China isn't just limited to Xinjiang. NTD's Chang Chun has more.
A book is bringing a face to forced labor victims in China. U.S.-based Chinese journalist Amelia Pang published her book titled Made in China earlier this year. It's about a Chinese prisoner, an SOS letter, and the hidden cost of America's thirst for cheap goods. The book spotlights a prisoner of conscience, Sun Yi. He was detained at the Masanja labor camp in China's northeast Liaoning province, all because he refused to give up his beliefs. He practices Falun Gong, a spiritual meditation system that teaches the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. It's been brutally persecuted in China since 1999. Inside the labor camp, Sun was forced to create products out of raw material by hand. One of the products required kneading a type of fibrous cardboard to soften it. The material was used to make decorative paper mushrooms. The products were exported to Europe. Not long after Sun began to work, his hands were rubbed raw by the kneading, and his wounds soon became infected. Workers in the camp were given daily quotas to fill. Most days, Sun says he could only sleep around 2 to 4 hours a day in order to create enough products to fill his quota. He recounts being so stressed that he even dreamed of making the paper mushrooms. Eventually, Sun secretly started sneaking handwritten notes into boxes of Halloween decorations he packaged. In 2012, an Oregon woman found one of his notes in a box of foam gravestones. The resulting media reports led to widespread accusation over China's labor practices. Zhang Jing was also detained in the same labor camp. She says she endured a similar experience.
The raw materials used to make handcrafts were all made from cardboard. We had to knead it into paper as soft as tissue. Then we made them into flowers using glue. That glue is very toxic. I rubbed the cardboard into paper petals with my hands every day. Basically, my hands couldn't hold even chopsticks when eating anymore. The skin of my fingers was destroyed by the glue.
Zhang also practices Falun Gong and is from China's northeastern city of Dalian. Zhang now lives in the U.S. She says even now, whenever she sees peeled garlic in the supermarket, her fears and memories from inside the camp rush back to her mind.
I don't want to buy it because when I was detained in Masanja labor camp, I was forced to peel garlic. I had to peel several sacks of garlic every day.
Another Falun Gong practitioner named Yu Ming was an entrepreneur in China. Because of Beijing's persecution of Falun Gong, he spent nearly 12 years in Chinese prisons and labor camps. He says slave laborers ranged from 16 to 70 years old. All of them were forced to work at least 12 hours a day.
When there was too much work to do, prisoners were forced to work 24 hours, even 48 hours. Some prisoners were forced to sleep on the concrete floor or at their workstation.
Yu said every prison, every labor camp, and every detention center in China has been transformed into a factory using forced labor, adding that every prisoner is now considered a cash cow, though many of them fall ill or die.
The authorities do not check the prisoners' health at all. Even AIDS patients, prisoners with various liver diseases, or when prisoners catch a cold or run a fever, they still have to work on the assembly line.
In her new book, Pang also explained that forced labor is far from the only form of torture used in the camps. In Masanja labor camp, Sun was often shackled by his hands and feet. At one point, he began a hunger strike to protest the abuse. But in response, he was force-fed through his nose. His mouth also was propped open by a metal gag, and hot sauce was poured into his eyes. In her book, Pang says global trade and Western supply chains have now become the Chinese Communist Party's biggest accomplices, and that consumers' pursuit of cheap products is fueling the flames. In 2019, Pang went undercover as a businesswoman and visited a drug rehabilitation center in Shanghai. She observed trucks there coming and going once every 2 hours, seemingly transporting goods out of the facility. Pang says her investigation revealed an important point. Foreign companies are able to investigate whether their partner companies in China are involved in forced labor, but instead they turn a blind eye to suit their personal interests. Pang believes Xinjiang is a good starting point to address the problem. That's because the Chinese regime has invested heavily in the region. It's also an important transportation hub for Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. The infrastructure project deals with foreign, usually poorer countries, bringing Chinese investment and construction projects overseas. Critics say it's known for trapping developing countries with debt. Chang Chun, NTD News.
And an update on Hong Kong. A court there is bringing charges against a barista and a media tycoon.
A Hong Kong court has found 7 prominent Democrats guilty of unauthorized assembly. The case is seen as the latest crackdown by China on its freest city after the imposition of a sweeping national security law last year. The 82-year-old barrister Martin Lee and media tycoon Jimmy Lai were among the defendants. Lee helped launch Hong Kong's largest opposition Democratic Party in the 1990s and is often referred to as the city's father of democracy. Another defendant, pro-democracy activist Lee Chuk-yun, spoke to reporters outside the court.
In this day of reckoning, the political suppression is equally to all those who have take part in the protest movement, including no matter whether you are the peaceful non-violence group or the braver, you are all caught under this political suppression wave.
The court case relates to a peaceful demonstration held on August the 18th in 2019, which grew into an unauthorized march as numbers swelled into the hundreds of thousands. During the trial, defense lawyers argued that freedom of assembly is a constitutional right in Hong Kong. But the district court judge said that that right was not absolute and argued that restrictions are imposed to preserve public safety and order. Sentencing will come later, with some legal experts expecting jail terms of 12 to 18 months. The maximum possible sentence is 5 years.
A World Health Organization panel says 2 Chinese vaccines have presented efficacy data that meets the WHO standard. That includes vaccines produced by Chinese state-owned firms Sinopharm and Sinovac. So far, there is no public data on the Sinopharm vaccine's efficacy, while the Sinovac vaccine's efficacy rate is only a little over 50%. That's according to data from Brazilian clinical trials. The Chinese regime says it has administered over 100 million vaccine doses to its 1.4 billion population. So far, it has not officially reported a single case of severe adverse side effects. But in Hong Kong, 13 people have died after getting vaccinated. 11 of them received the China-made Sinovac vaccine. Hong Kong officials say the deaths are not directly linked to the vaccines, but there is widespread distrust among citizens toward both Hong Kong authorities and Beijing. So far, only 6% of Hong Kongers have signed up to get inoculated. Data from other countries also raises questions about the efficacy of Sinovac vaccines. Chile, for example, has vaccinated more than 1/3 of its population, faster than any other country in the Americas. It mostly relies on Sinovac doses shipped from China. But the country is facing a surge of virus cases. It recorded the highest daily number of new cases last week, and the pace of infection rates have doubled in the past month, leaving its intensive care system at the breaking point. Turkey has also been relying solely on Chinese vaccines. Since rolling out the doses in January, the country has now vaccinated nearly 10% of its population. But the country is still seeing a resurgence of cases too. On March 30th, it recorded the highest number of new infections in a day since the pandemic started. In the past month, both Pakistan's prime minister and its president tested positive for the virus. Both had already gotten Chinese vaccine shots. China's vaccine industry has long been plagued by scandals. From 2007 to 2018, at least 13 major manufacturers in China were found to be producing defective vaccines and causing severe side effects. The Chinese regime is claiming that NASA has hurt the feelings of 1.4 billion Chinese people. The reason? A drop-down box on NASA's website listed Taiwan as a country. NASA's website lets people send their names to Mars on a future flight. Those interested can fill in their name, mailing code, and select a country of origin on the sign-up page. On Monday, Chinese state media questioned why Taiwan appeared on the list of countries. A Beijing agency urged NASA to correct what it calls its mistake as soon as possible. NASA has not responded to Bloomberg's request for comment. The CCP has long claimed Taiwan as its own territory. It forbids foreign countries from establishing diplomatic ties with both Taipei and Beijing, even though Taiwan has its own constitution, military, and currency. The Chinese regime often gets into conflicts with foreign companies over how they classify Taiwan. In 2018, U.S. airlines stopped listing Taiwan as a country following pressure from Beijing. Marriott International had its website briefly blocked in China because it listed Taiwan as a country in a survey. The chief editor of a Chinese state media is shocking many people with his remarks yet again. This time, they have to do with a war with Taiwan. NTD Xu Wenhui has more.
The chief editor of CCP mouthpiece Global Times says he wants to capture strong men in order to, as he calls, liberate Taiwan. He adds if anyone tries to run away, he will shoot the person dead from behind. The editor, Hu Xijin, is known for his loyalty to the Communist Party and his incendiary comments towards the U.S. and other Western countries. This time, his remarks are in response to a question on Chinese social media Weibo. A Chinese internet user asked Hu on Wednesday, if we were to liberate Taiwan, would you and your family go to the battlefield? Hu replies saying yes, and that he would also capture the person that asked the question and send him to the front line. But his remarks soon backfired online. Some internet users mock his remarks as simply an idiot's dream day and say Hu has no shame.
Chinese people see that clearly he's on behalf of the ruling party. From him we can see the party's level is so low it's pitiful. They do this to safeguard their power. Now they make it so bad both inside and outside China. Chinese people are fed up with that. Even the military may not necessarily take their orders. People can think for themselves. The stuff he puts forward is not suitable for the civilized world. He's messing things up.
And some internet users also say they hope things can go the other way, that Taiwan can liberate communist China and save the Chinese people. The CCP claims Taiwan as part of its own territory. For decades, it has been threatening to annex Taiwan by force. Democratic Taiwan has its own president, constitution, and military. Wenhui Xu, NTD News.
The Chinese regime is opening a new consulate in the Australian city of Adelaide, but residents there don't seem to welcome it. Many rights activists and locals are gathering to protest the CCP's surveillance and infiltration.
The Chinese consulate in Adelaide was having their opening ceremony, but only behind closed gates, while hundreds of protesters gathered outside, shouting slogans and holding banners. The protest was organized by the East Turkestan Australia Association, ETAA, and joined by communities of Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, and Falun Gong practitioners, Hong Kongers, Vietnamese, local Australian residents, politicians, and representatives of Australian farmers and industries impacted by the CCP's political interference. South Australian Independent Senator Rex Patrick expressed his concerns of the location of the Chinese consulate, which sits on a 5,200 square metre piece of land in a residential suburb in the east of Adelaide.
There's no question that the Chinese government has been engaged in political interference, in espionage, in cyber attacks. This is not acceptable conduct. I'm quite concerned with the location of 10 consular officials here in Adelaide in circumstances where this is a naval shipbuilding hub for the Royal Australian Navy.
Ted Hui, who was a legislative councillor in Hong Kong, also attended the rally. Hui, who has previously been arrested for protesting changes to Hong Kong democracy, arrived Adelaide a week ago. He said he came to show the CCP that Hong Kongers are not giving up.
It's also a gesture that we won't be afraid of CCP. We will be standing right in front of them. And I'm doing it on behalf of all Hong Kong people who are suffering.
It was reported that Premier Stephen Marshall attended the opening, but he was not sighted by protesters or reporters standing outside the consulate. NTD TV, Adelaide.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.